you, Zena. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining Harvard Alumni for Global Development for this fireside chat with President Mary Steiner from the United Nations Association San Francisco chapter. My name is Tianwang Liu, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Hagi. I'm honored to moderate this discussion with President Steiner. So before we begin, we'd like to go over some housekeeping notes to be mindful of throughout the session. The audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions towards the end of the program. So please feel free to use the box to input any questions you may have. So the box is located on the bottom side of the Zoom bar. And you can also use this box to input any questions or chat with other participants throughout the conversation. So please note, this session is being recorded and will be available to view after the event. We will share details with you on how to view the recording following the discussion. So please be sure you stay connected with Hagi on social media or on our website at globaldevelopment.sigs.harvard.edu to stay updated with upcoming events and workshops throughout the remainder of the year. I would also like to take a moment to thank our president, Zena Adamu, for her support in making this event happen, as well as the Hagi leadership team for helping to market this event. So Zena, your support and participation is much, much appreciated.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Okay, now it's my honor to introduce our guest, President Mary Steiner. President Steiner has a long history of leadership in education, technology transfer, and human rights for sustainable development. More recently, as the president of UNASF, she has done a lot of work to facilitate the growth of San Francisco chapter and to educate about the vital work of the United Nations locally and globally. In fact, when I say recently, it's already been 9 years since President Steiner took office in November 2014. As the president, she convenes the program and communications committees to provide a platform for partnerships to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. She also established the Ratify Movement as a program of UNASF for US ratification of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. President Steiner also led the presentation of the United Nations In Their Hands, Women Taking Ownership of Peace through the lens of women photographers exhibition at the War Memorial Veterans Building. More broadly, the UN Women, Peacekeeping Operations, and the Department of Political and Public Affairs worked directly with the UNASF, where the UN chapter was signed. So President Steiner, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chinwang, and also Zena, and to all of you members of the Harvard International Development Club. Really, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm just so honored that you're interested in what we're doing. We believe that what we're doing is vital, that the understanding of how the United Nations works is just totally dependent on how we work with our elected representatives, our Congress and our diplomats and other NGOs and civil society organizations. So looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much, President Steiner. We're really looking forward to chat with you. So, okay, all right, we are about to dive in. So before we actually get started, we're actually also curious to know more and meet our audience. I will ask a few questions, so feel free to use the Zoom action the emoji or the raise hand reaction to answer our questions. And President Steiner, please also feel free to chime in if there's anything more you want to know about the audience. So how many people are on the East Coast? Oh, George. And how many people on the West Coast? Yeah. And how many of you are still on campus? Okay, I guess that's a little obvious. And how many of you received a degree from Harvard? Oh, here. Yay. And how many of you heard about this event through our Huggy, like a newsletter or LinkedIn page or on social media? Wonderful. Thanks so much for staying connected with us. Okay, last question. How many of you worked before, are still in, or plan to participate in the public sector? Oh, awesome. Wow, we have a big attendance from the public sector. Okay, so it's so great to meet you all, and thanks again for joining us. I'm gonna begin with the moderated questions, and then we have some rapid fire questions, and then we will turn to our audience for the open Q&A. So President Steiner, you have a lot of global experience. Or for example, you have led student and teacher cultural exchanges with the USSR. You're also a guest of the Russian Academy of Sciences. You also attended the Global Forum in Rio de Janeiro. So what are the learning experiences as a global citizen? What are most surprising? And yeah, just in general, tell us more about your experience as a global citizen.
Well, on a personal level, being a citizen diplomat has lots of rewards. However, I do recommend preparing, especially if you're traveling to a very foreign culture like the Soviet Union. To us Americans, it is a mystery or place. And that was way back when the Soviet Union was becoming the Russian Federation. So essentially, it was not a very happy time for Russians, but it was an exciting time in that they wanted to learn from Americans and get to know Americans. So I think the golden rule is really important, and to be sincere. The preparation I had, for example, to go to Russia was all of that. And I think I convinced Russians that I was a friend and not a threat by appreciating their culture. They were surprised that I knew about Karl Marx, that I knew about Chekhov, Tchaikovsky, and so forth. I showed some appreciation for the Russian culture and the Russian language and spoke some Russian. But I think when I was traveling about alone, mostly, there were some surprises, lots of surprises. One of them was on a train from Moscow to Kyiv, and I was sharing a cabin with three men, and one of them clearly said in Russian he did not like Americans, and the other one said, "Oh, he knew Americans. He'd gone to UC Berkeley and he'd lived in the International House." So I at least had something in common with him, but it was a very long train ride. I think just as the surprises, I thought I was fairly well prepared. On arrival, these are 4 trips to Russia during that time period. It was New Year's Eve, and that's a big celebration in Russia. I was the head of the delegation and sleep deprived. We just arrived and we were taken to a festivity in a scientific city outside of Russia. And when they opened the door, there was a Russian woman holding, they have kind of a floral crown that wraps around their head and an embroidered dress, holding a platter with a round piece of bread on it and a little spoon and a cup of salt. And I had no idea what she had in mind. I had no idea what to do. So I thought, oh, there's a spoon with some salt. I'll put it in my mouth. Well, I learned later that you're supposed to tear off the bread and dip it in the salt and eat it. It's a very ancient, very honored tradition. It means they think you're a very honored guest. And actually swallowing the salt broke the tradition. It meant that we were going to have a long friendship. Salt was very, very expensive in the old times. So it was a mix of the new and the old. And I think globally, that's what we're finding if we were to go anywhere. And with the connections I've made right now through the United Nations Association, we have been establishing those connections. We're just talking about Ghana, linking up to what's going on in Ghana and having speakers in our forums as well. So that's just a sample of some of the surprises I've had in traveling and engaging with foreign cultures.
Yeah, that's quite an experience and so helpful to know. And again, from your knowledge, you mentioned that recently we have like more recent exchanges and the United Nations have a probably new agenda. Would you like to tell us a bit more about the UN, for example, 2030 agenda, and what insights have you gained about the values and predispositions that's relevant? Thank you.
I think I was predisposed to always care about human rights, to work for peace, support the preamble to the UN Charter, which speaks to preventing the scourge of war, to providing socio and economic development, and protecting human rights, peace and security. And it's really, I realize that's really what I've been working for as I've been more exposed to more international conferences, including UNDP conferences. That's the UN Department of Development. So I think that that was my I was predisposed to that, but also caring about other cultures, especially the youth. I've grown up in California in mostly a farming community, and my high school friends were Japanese Americans. They had been imprisoned in camps during World War II. My family friends, close socializing friends, were German, American, Hawaiian, and they lived in the Philippines, actually were Philippine citizens when the Japanese invaded the Philippines. They spent some terrible time in Camp San Tomas. And then I had worked for an orphanage in Pasadena, Altadena, where there were orphans from Eastern Europe. Done the exposure working at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. All of that gave me actually a cosmic point of view. It was beyond the planet in many ways. So sustainability. So what does that mean to me, and I think to the UN? It means that we're preserving what our ancestors have left for us, and protecting it and developing it for our future generations. So the Agenda 2030 was adopted by the General Assembly in 2015. Unanimously, all 193 nations voted for this. That's I think maybe the only time this has happened. To me, it's a unifying message. It's not binding, and it's really a declaration. Some countries think it should be binding, it should be a treaty, but at least it is some kind of policy for us to use in terms of setting goals in 17 areas. So are any of you familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? There's 17 of them, and they range from eliminating poverty, number 1, to a good health and well-being, to gender equality, to reducing inequities, to sustainable cities, to partnerships for the goals to peace, justice, strong institutions, life below water. And in fact, we've been finding that those goals, putting them into practice, establishes a relationship not only with the UN, but also with our cities, where we are. How are our cities implementing these goals? Are they aware? Are the universities aware? Are the students studying these goals? In the United States, we've slipped back. We're behind. The pandemic. The COVID pandemic really has been very destructive, very debilitating. We're hoping to regroup. A nation like Japan has adopted the 2030 agenda. We're to achieve these goals by 2030. And they are leading the way. They all wear these SDG pins, and they know what their policy is. And it started with the UNDP working with corporations in Japan. So that's just an example of how I became involved.
Oh, that's incredible. We can see that like your global experience also affect your like a local citizen mind, and then it also help you having made so much like great contributions. Really, thank you for your service and contribution to the world. Yeah. So it sounds like you have a long history like working in the public sector. Are there any like a skill set you gained and you feel like the most useful, and how did you achieve them? Like, I feel like our audience might really want to know what kind of skills we might need if we also want to make such great contribution.
You can all do it. It takes just a commitment. You need to decide to do it, number one, to have the will to do it. And you will discover strengths and knowledge you never knew you had just by getting out there. You have to decide to take action and to do something, whether it's joining a nonprofit, going to work for a business, or even starting your own business or your own nonprofit. Getting elected was changed my life. Getting elected to public office. I had studied communications because I was different languages, because I was interested in how people talk to each other and make policy, right? And make agreements. And that led me to the public sphere in organizing events about policymaking. So it was I guess you'd call a handler or a representative of a political party approached me. She was a diminutive elderly woman with a deep voice. She chain smoked. She was tough. She had been mugged. She would go and play poker with the men. She would be everywhere. And especially she had a buddy, and another woman her age, who would recruit, especially women, for public office, believing that women would bring good governance and that we needed balance in order to resolve so many of the issues, especially in local government. So I think that just the recognition and having to battle to get elected for an office that I didn't think really, even though it's a constitutional office, it's in the state constitution, I didn't really think it was that important an office, right? But there were threats. I had death threats, and the ballots for my district disappeared. They were found later at the post office. And my opponent, who had name recognition, had written a book, there was a documentary about him on public television 2 days before the election. Well, I won because I worked hard, but I had a network. So networking is absolutely essential. And getting in there and putting on events and demonstrating what you can do. And you'll be recruited. Everything I've done, I've been recruited to do.
Yeah, wow, that's really surprising to know, but really useful otherwise. Like just take action, just be there, fight for the balance. And yeah, I think you mentioned networking and you also mentioned people like doing different things, like recruiting women. Are there anyone you met like specifically during your experience that you find as like mentor or very useful guiding you through your career?
So there have been different people at different times. They haven't all been women. And it seems, I have longevity, and that's why I have a long history. I've been able to try lots of different jobs and careers. Who would think that I'd be involved doing research for Value Line? I never thought that I would be working closely with the president of Value Line for securities investment, for investing in real estate. So it was also there have been men who've been quite fatherly or collegial in giving me advice. And I have to thank the men, because we women are not going to join in on our policymaking unless we can collaborate with and have lots of different diversity in genders. And also to think about the intersection, how all of this intersects, these rights intersect with race, religion, ethnicity, age, generations. There are many factors that contribute to where we are now. And I have had the experience of spending time in the Southwest. And it was a mind-boggling experience for me to be in Texas. Had no idea we had such a different culture. So I think it's important to be out there and to travel and to learn and consider it lifelong learning.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, diversity makes everything like better, and we need like people from men, women, and also from different races, different nationality. Totally agree. Yeah, that's also part of the reason you mentioned networking is also important. Like try to know more people, learning more about the culture. Any like advice in networking as well?
Yes, so you're probably aware you're networking right now with the Alumni Club. This is networking, right? And this is actually peer learning, peer support. And that's something that is so valuable we started, I'm the most proud of what we've been doing, because we've been bringing different age groups together for networking within their own generation, focusing on themselves personally, but also having contact with older people for mentoring and additional experience. We could be doing better. And actually now we have so many more tools, right? We have LinkedIn and so many more tools with the internet and such. When I started out, I was there when, the internet was just starting. And in fact, it was the first time you're able to send a fax to the other side of the world. And now look at us, we have much more freedom. The other danger, though, the blockage to all of this networking is, and I think you're aware, cyber issues and misinformation and so forth. So that's another thing, something that we really need to focus on for proper communication. I defer to Zaina because I know you're an expert in communication. To me, that's just education and communication are so essential.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, communication do make us better, and we are so grateful that we take this action to invite you and work with you. Yeah, and yeah, thanks again for like agreeing to chat with us. So we're actually pretty fast. We're already like almost 30 minutes in. Yeah. So I wonder, do you want to talk more about like your career in UN, for example? What are the biggest achievements like you are proud of?
Well, I'd like to ask you all some questions too, because I'd like your impressions about international development and where you think the UN should be going. What should the UN be doing? Are these sustainable development goals clear enough? They have more than 100, maybe more than 150 indicators, more than 150 targets. They rely on data systems, metrics, and not all the world is capable in those areas as well to evaluate. What do you think we should be doing? What is the pushing us and what is holding us back? I guess is my question. I'd like to hear from you all.
Yeah, I think I can start, and Zaina and George, Michael, Amar, you can add. I guess we all agree that global development is like important issue, and actually that's one of the key mission of Hagi. Our name is Harvard Alumni for Global Development, and we all agree UN has been playing important role in pushing for a better world. I mean, different times we have different challenges, like now inequality, climate change, diversity. We do need to get more people being aware of the issues and also take action, collaborate to make things better. And I think UN has like a very important role and advantage to getting everyone get together and collaborate. Yeah.
So do you see any, I think we probably agree we should be doing that. Probably all 193 countries think we should be doing that, right? So what's holding us back?
Well, this is good. I'm glad to have the opportunity to, sorry, George, just a quick point. Sometimes I was just having this conversation with a colleague the other day about as much as the UN, in addition to the World Bank and IMF and CO and all those international organizations, they are trying. I will give them that. But sometimes I question whether the SDGs and the Millennial Development Goals are realistic. And it would be interesting to see what growth or what improvements have happened since they were put into place. Was it in 2015 the SDGs were put into place? I'm not sure, I don't remember. I don't know, it's such a complex and nuanced issue, and it's so hard to figure out if these very lofty and ambitious goals is going to really make any huge impact in the long term. It's just so hard to tell. So I'll be interested to see what impact is made in the long term.
So anything else?
If I could please ask, if I could add and not take away from the topic of relevance that Zaina and the President herself have just gone over and mentioned as possible obstacles toward creating an environment in which the United Nations can take an active role. For an example, if I could please pass this along, only from my own perspective, is that the ergonomic and the eco-friendly systems that everyone seems to purport and are holding as a cherished goal, I believe are realistic and most important. The reason for the statement and the defense of that statement comes from understanding how the world's resources are being utilized. If, for instance, a perspective on what China's role is in the Silk Road Initiative, and that is to perhaps use issues relating to fossil fuels or the natural habitat and usurping those roles so that there's a sense of usury involved in the objective culmination of extracting natural resources, coal, oil, gold, diamonds, alloys, uranium, plutonium, natural resources on the tusks of elephants, the natural resources that the habitat, the fossils, the flora that perpetuate the sub-Saharan African continent could be better utilized with the help of the United Nations oversight. The China Road Initiative, I believe, was mentioned in the current candidacy of Ambassador Burns to be nominated for the ambassador for China, as Senator Jan Shaheen interviewed him for that perspective and for that particular role. I'm only stating what I think could be possibly done in terms of what the United Nations could focus on in the coming 10, 20 years, and that is to prevent the usury that comes from extracting tusks from elephants, extracting diamonds for the use of nefarious or totalitarian regimes. And that's where I think the United Nations could take an oversight and a major definitive role to effect an eco-friendly, ergonomically safe world.
Well,
Thank you for the
yes, thank you.
Madam
Thank
President, for the movement. It's so
That-
precious. Thank you
That's
for that.
one of the, that's one of, we have an echo. Somebody need to turn off their, mute themselves, maybe? Yeah, thank you. So that's exactly why the UN was formed, right? Doug Hammarskjöld was an example of a Secretary General who actually was on his way to Africa when he was, now they believe, assassinated, but he was working for the nations of Africa to become independent and to be able to have some sovereignty over their own resources. And we know, it's just known that much of the conflict in the continent of Africa is over minerals and yes, other natural resources, timber as well. So there are regional organizations of different areas. There is a regional organization in Africa that is becoming more professional, shall we say, in rule of law, practicing rule of law. The UN also formed a new agency in 2006 called the Rule of Law. It's an extension of UN peacekeeping. We know that, yes, there are wars, conflicts over these minerals. How do we maintain peace and rule of law? And that is a huge area that is expanding with the UN, the use of tribunals for war crimes, genocide, rape is also a war crime. So we're finding that in the African continent especially, there are a number of conflicts, especially the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now we see what's happening in Sudan. Yes, there are areas where the UN can improve. For example, we've seen the UN lead negotiations in Myanmar, in the Sudan, in Afghanistan, in Syria. And we've seen how they've almost established a constitution and a form of democracy and representation. Then there is a military takeover, something happens, right, to prevent it. And so we've discovered there's a pattern now. And how can we work with that? There are officials in the Secretariat who have said that it is happening, and they realize that it takes much longer to negotiate. And it also takes rule of law, and it takes enforcement. Yes, there are peacekeeping operatives in these countries, many of them, but they are not allowed in. The sovereign state must invite them in to promote a rule of law. And we've seen that the peacekeepers have actually caused problems. What happened in Haiti? They brought cholera to Haiti. So it is improving. They're bringing more women into peacekeeping now. So the violence is being reduced. You're right about the oversight. The UN recently is being criticized. There is a nonprofit called Pass Blue. I recommend you subscribe to it. It's free online. It's run by women, retired journalists, New York Times, Washington Post. They're based in the UN headquarters in New York. They just published a piece about how opaque the UN is. And many of the officials in these positions are there for political reasons, not because of competency. And so the way the UN operates is under more review because we have an NGO like PassBlue, because we have our UNASF,